Good evening. Thank you, Jen Pearl and Milena Robinson, for that very appropriate music for tonight's discussion of the construction of the Erie Canal. I'm Diane Sayre, and this is the New York Symposium with Diane Sayre. I am the LaRouche candidate for U.S. Senate against Chuck Schumer in 2022 on the November 8th ballot. So here we are on the eve of our 246th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and if the Founding Fathers were to return, they would barely recognize the nation. In fact, from the policies of this administration, they might think that King George had taken over the United States again. Now, we got a little reprieve from actually a few rulings, the most recent from the Supreme Court on the EPA, which puts all of this carbon dioxide nonsense into a little bit of jeopardy. This is extremely important. Nobody has conclusively proven that CO2 is causing climate change. In fact, it would be very odd for God to create a universe where human beings exhaling was destroying the planet. So this is promising, but obviously we have a long ways to go. We have a government which is sending billions and billions of dollars worth of weapons to a Nazi fascist regime in Ukraine. Biden at the NATO summit, the United States has announced we're sending another $800 million worth of weapons. It turns out, just coincidentally, that the amount of money that NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority, needs in repairs for its 600,000 residents is $40 billion. So think about an administration that would prioritize arming Nazis to put us on a trajectory toward nuclear war with Russia, as opposed to addressing the horrific conditions in some of these buildings, the mold, the leaky sewage pipes, rat infestation. People who are paying rent, who are working hard, are living in subhuman conditions in New York City. This has to be changed. That's why I'm running. Now, I just want to tell you a couple of things which are somewhat amusing. And of course, we did just have the NATO summit, and NATO has determined that not only Russia, but China is a threat. I would also like to say, speaking of China, I would like to congratulate China and Hong Kong and Xi Jinping, because today is the 25th anniversary of the liberation of Hong Kong from the British Empire. And I think that's really the best way to put it. Most Americans, particularly Nancy Pelosi and Steve Bannon, are not aware that the reason why Hong Kong was separated from mainland China was part of a treaty agreement after the Opium Wars, when China finally successfully beat back the British destruction of their population through massive drug pushing. So the British have been holding Hong Kong as a remainder of that, the Opium Wars. That's why people would be celebrating today the 25th anniversary of Hong Kong going back to China. As Xi Jinping said, one country, two systems. And he said that as long as we abide by that, Hong Kong has great potential for real economic development. Now, otherwise, just on a sort of amusing note, the British fat prime minister, who was having wild parties while imposing lockdowns on everybody else, said that it's too bad that Putin was not a woman, because he would not have done the, quote, macho war invasion, unquote, of Ukraine. And he snickered that if Putin had been a woman, which he obviously isn't. Well, Putin responded by saying, I just want to remind you all about the events of modern history when Margaret Thatcher made a decision to launch military action against Argentina over the Falkland Islands. Here's a woman decided to launch military action. Where are the Falkland Islands, and where is Britain? And this was dictated by nothing but imperial ambitions. And I would remind people about Margaret Thatcher coming to the United States in 1990 to put iron in the spine of the senior President Bush, to get him to invade Iraq over Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, something that our ambassador to Iraq had given him permission to do. So apparently this Putin's response to Boris Johnson is creating great an uproar of mirth all over Ibero-America. So what we will be hearing from today from Chris Sayre, my husband, a longtime LaRouche organizer, and Bob Wesser, who is the Sayre for Senate campaign historian, about one of the first major infrastructure projects in the United States, the Erie Canal. This is particularly important today to reflect on the vision of the founders of our republic in building this, when you look at the horrific circumstances hitting our country, because we seem to be incapable now of doing basic water management. People have heard Lake Mead is drying up. You may have heard a couple of weeks ago about 2,500 cattle or so that died in horrific heat conditions, that we didn't have enough irrigation for them to be able to get into water or to do anything to cool themselves. We have forest fires, we have floods. Water should be relatively easy to manage. It flows downhill. So if you know where gravity is, you can figure out how to make sure water gets to the places where you need it. But we haven't done anything of the sort in decades. So since it is the anniversary of our Declaration of Independence, I think we should celebrate by resolving that we are going to get our nation to return to the principles on which it was founded. My campaign has a particular mobilization going on this weekend, but we'll talk about that later. And I'll just turn it over to Chris. And don't forget to unmute yourself.
Okay, so you can hear me?
You're kind of faint, but go ahead.
That's so. Oh, all right. I don't know. Better?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm going to share with you a PowerPoint. Here we go. I put together. On the question of the Erie Canal, but it's what I wanted to go through a little bit was the history before the Erie Canal, and the question of why the Erie Canal was necessary. This shows the map of the so-called Proclamation Line of 1763. What you see is on the one side, you see the boundary areas of the states that, you know, they go all the way back. But what the British did, you can see the darker area there, British colonies, right? The Western claims and the British colonies. Though 1763, that was the end of the French and Indian War, and what the British did.
Chris, I can't see anything.
Oh, is that so?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Okay, there we go.
There we go. Thank you.
All right, sorry about that. Okay, so here's the I don't know if you can see my mouse, but anyway, you see the dark areas, the British colonies. What the Treaty of Paris did was effectively box in the colonies, and so that was the obvious point that the British wanted to do. They wanted to box in the colonies. The revolution was then fought, which is a long history, and we won't go through that right now. But you can see here the natural problem that you would have of of developing the interior of the United States. You have this huge Appalachian mountain chain, and so this natural thing, and there's so much to say on this question in terms of the times of Alexander Spotswood in the 1700s, who was fighting to get across the Blue Ridge Mountains. There you see. So every single patriot knew. There's George Washington as a surveyor, a young man who was actually working on the Spotswood project to get on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains. Now, so this is critical. This is known. Washington knows it. Every patriot knows that we have got to get across those mountains if we're going to develop the interior of the soon-to-be United States. Now, so we're at the end of the Revolution here, and I want to make the point that General Washington, this is in 1783, so the defeat of Yorktown has already occurred in 1781. General Washington is what you see this stone building here. This is in front of his headquarters in Newburgh, New York. And the river that you see in the background is our Hudson River, our beautiful, magnificent Hudson River. And there is a statue there of General Washington looking out on the Hudson River. Now, in 1783, Washington, while he's waiting for the official peace to be signed by the British, he writes a letter. I have lately made a tour through the Lakes George and Champlain as far as Crown Point, then returning to Schenectady. I proceeded up the Mohawk River from Fort Schuyler, formerly Fort Stanwix, crossed over to the Wood Creek, which empties into the Oneida Lake and affords the water communication with Ontario. I then traversed the country to the head of the eastern branch of the Susquehanna and viewed the Lake Otsego and the portage between that lake and the Mohawk River at Canajoharie. Prompted by these actual observations, I could not help taking a more contemplative and extensive view of the vast inland navigation of these United States from maps and the information of others, and could not but be struck with the immense diffusion and importance of it, and with the goodness of that providence which has dealt her favors to us with so profuse a hand. Would to God we may have wisdom enough to improve them. I shall not rest contented till I have explored the Western country and traversed those lines, or great part of them, which have given bounds to a new empire. So this is towards the end of the American Revolution, but nonetheless in the middle of the American Revolution, in the sense he does not yet have the peace treaty in front of him. It has not yet been signed. At this point, he is still nervous about the British reinstigating the Revolutionary War against the colonies. So I just want to show you what he's talking about here. The Hudson River Basin, which you can see going up, and the Mohawk River, which cuts in. And of course, there's Lake Ontario, as he basically describes, just waiting to be connected to the Mohawk River, to the Hudson River, and down to New York. And here is a topographical map which shows you, as Washington discussed, the bounty that God gave us. If you go back just to look here, you see this great Appalachian Valley, but number 2 in that is the Mohawk Valley. And you see how that juts in, right? Okay, well, here's the Mohawk Valley, right? And what you can see is this lower area all along Lake Ontario and the Finger Lakes just below it, all right? So this is a potential path of linking up New York to what will become Buffalo, or I mean, Buffalo already exists, but it's just it's a small settlement, and you see Lake Erie there at the back of on the western side of New York State. Okay, so here's a U.S. map, 1784. What you see now is that with the victory of the American Revolution, we have now expanded greatly. The colonies have expanded all the way to the Mississippi River. We're no longer blocked by this treaty, this proclamation of 1763. We have the potential to develop the entire area to the Mississippi Valley. But the problem is, of course, that mountain range is still there. Now, Washington, not being interested in only his state of Virginia, and it's a large state. You can see the border of Virginia there. It's the biggest state in the Union, right? You see that at that point, the state of Virginia goes all the way to the Mississippi. It's huge, and Washington, though, being a nationalist, not being a Virginian, decides that he's not only interested, he is in 1785, he becomes the head of the Potomac Canal Company, and they're working on the Potomac Canal. You can see that border there between Maryland and Virginia, right here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but you can see it down by Washington, D.C., and the border between Maryland and Virginia, the Potomac Canal Company. He is working feverishly on developing the Potomac Canal, but at this time, and this is his concern. He says this is a letter from George Washington to Benjamin Harrison, who I believe is the governor of Virginia at the time, 1784. Remember, this is before the federal constitution has been created, right? We have no federal constitution. This is the period in between the victory against the British and the creation of the federal constitution. He says, the Western settlers, I speak now from my own observation, stand as it were upon a pivot. The touch of a feather would turn them any way. They have looked down the Mississippi until the Spaniards, very impolitically, I think, for themselves, threw difficulties in their way. And they looked that way for no other reason than because they could glide gently down the stream without considering, perhaps, the fatigues of the voyage back again and the time necessary to perform it in. And because they have no other means of coming to us but by a long land transportation and unimproved roads. Unimproved roads. So Washington's not even president yet, but what is he focused on? Infrastructure, internal improvements. Would to God that we had the wisdom to improve what he has given us. So this Washington is not an environmentalist. He recognizes man's dominion over nature and the necessity to improve nature, improve roads, improve the areas that God has given us that are obvious for canal development and later for railroad development. So a gentleman from New York State visited Washington in, sorry, not 1985, my mistake there, 1785, discussing the possibility of an Erie Canal, discussing the possibility of what Washington had looked at earlier. In December 1791, he proposed to the New York State Legislature that natural waterways could be used to create what later became the Erie Canal across New York State. He then, along with Philip Schuyler, organized the Western Inland Lock Navigation Company in 1792. Now remember, who is Schuyler? He's an American Revolutionary general. He was critical in the victory against the British in the American Revolution. He becomes a senator from the state of New York, like our dear Diane will become in November, God willing, and if we put the work into it. So he's one of the first, maybe the first senator from the state of New York. But before that, he becomes the president of the Western Inland Lock Navigation Company, working with Elkanah Watson. And they actually build some of the first locks in that initial area that Washington is talking about between the Mohawk River and Lake Ontario, Wood Creek. So this is the first attempt. Now, he is also the father-in-law of Alexander Hamilton. And Alexander Hamilton, who was the first Treasury Secretary of the United States of the Washington administration. Hamilton was the son-in-law of Schuyler. He was the founder of the first national bank. And the idea of this national bank, and there was a huge brawl over this national bank, over the question of the national bank. And that's a subject for another discussion, but I will make the point here that the people that fought to create this nation, Washington, Hamilton, Schuyler, others, Robert Morris, Gouverneur Morris, who we will get to, who's critical in this, the people that fought for the creation of the nation. Remember, Hamilton wrote the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers were written to organize New York State to join the Union. It was not clear that New York State would join the Union. There was massive opposition in New York State to join the Union. And it was critical that other patriots organized around the country, that Virginia joined the Union. And then with the organizing of Hamilton and the Federalist Papers and the arguments that he made in defense of the Union, the Union was formed. New York State did join the Union. I believe they were the 10th to join the Union. Virginia, after Virginia, maybe, yeah. So, you know, this was a huge brawl, and Hamilton was critical in the creation of this nation. So he organized the first national bank. So a national bank, and Washington, of course, he heard arguments from the two opposing factions. He heard arguments from Hamilton. He heard arguments from Jefferson. And he sided with Hamilton, said, Hamilton is correct. You do not need a constitutional amendment to create a national bank. It is implicit within the Constitution of the United States that in order to create a sovereign currency, in order to create credit for the investment in the development of the nation, for the investment in the development of the internal improvements of the nation, the manufacturing, the agriculture, the scientific capabilities, the development of the people, the general welfare of the people, that this national bank was obviously necessary to the functioning of the republic. Okay, so now here's Thomas Jefferson. Here's I just want to pose to you, Jefferson was opposed to the national bank. He also mocked the idea of the Erie Canal. In 1809, a group of New Yorkers went to Washington, D.C. to look for funding for this canal, which they argued was a natural bridge to the Great Lakes. And what Jefferson said in response is, "Why, sir, here is a canal of a few miles projected by General Washington." He's talking about the Potomac Canal, which, if completed, would render this a fine commercial city, Washington, D.C., which has languished for many years because of the small sum of $200,000 necessary to complete it. Cannot be obtained from the general government, the state government, or from individuals. And you talk of making a canal of 350 miles through the wilderness. It is a little short of madness to think of it at this day. Well, Gouverneur Morris, who wrote the preamble of the Constitution of the United States, he's the gentleman in the tan next to Robert Morris. They're not related, but Robert Morris was one of the key financier of the American Revolution. Gouverneur Morris, who wrote the preamble of the Constitution, very first and foremost, the idea of the general welfare of the nation. He was reflected upon by DeWitt Clinton, later a champion, or at that point a champion of the canal. Although you see here, he questions whether it can be done. He says, "I very naturally opposed the intermediate hills and valleys as insuperable obstacles." His answer was, in substance, labor improbus omnia vincit, and that the object would justify the labor and expense, whatever that might be. In 1808, Morris became the head of the Canal Commission. And until 1816, he wrote document after document and did trips throughout New York and studied the potential for this canal. DeWitt Clinton, who was another senator from New York State and who became governor of New York State, he picked up this fight for the canal. He says, "The greater part of the United States form one vast island, susceptible of circumnavigation to the extent of many thousands of miles. The most distant parts of the Confederacy will then, with the canal, be in a state of approximation, and the distinctions of Eastern and Western, of Southern and Northern interests will be entirely prostrated. To be instrumental in producing so much good by increasing the stock of human happiness and by extending the empire of improvement, of knowledge, of refinement, and of religion is an ambition worthy of a free people." So this is a very beautiful idea, and you see you see how the founding fathers thought about this. Now here's a creature that we'll run into again and again, Martin Van Buren, who attacked the Erie Canal as the ditch of iniquity and Clinton's ditch. And I would just make the point that he's in the circles of Aaron Burr, the traitor that shot Alexander Hamilton, the traitor that actually attempted to fulfill the worst nightmare of George Washington in 1784. Actually, this creep, well, actually not Burr. I'm speaking of Burr. Attempted to split the United States off from the Mississippi, west of the in the Mississippi Valley. This Martin Van Buren came out of the Burr circles, and Buren attacks the Erie Canal in this way. He attacks Clinton personally, and later on, which we won't get into tonight because this is, we can touch on it briefly, but it's a whole other discussion. he is one of the key people, along with Andrew Jackson, who destroy the second national bank of the United States. So you see this fight within the United States, within the state of New York. And this is something that people really need to think about, the history of this, and think about Diane's campaign from that standpoint, what we are trying to reignite, the proud history of New York State versus this treason faction. So this is, I made the point the other day, this is how we used to celebrate the 4th of July in the United States. We started to begin the construction of great projects. So here is where the Erie Canal construction began. July 4th, 1817, first boat trip from Rome to Utica, October 22nd, 1819. So what they did was they took this section from Rome to Utica, which was relatively flat, and they said, we're gonna start here. We're gonna build this section. It was the easiest section, with the idea being basically, once you get this going and once you prove we can do it, I mean, they knew the rest was not going to be so easy, but you get this section done and you get things rolling, and then we can build the rest, and we'll develop the engineering capabilities to build the rest. Now, I just would point out that in between that 1810 to 1817, something very important occurred, something critical to the United States, which was the War of 1812. And the War of 1812 found the United States, in a state of collapse somewhat. I mean, we were not in a position in the beginning to fight that war and to defeat the Second War of Independence, as it was called. We developed that capability. A lot of the development of that was on the Great Lakes, actually, in terms of ships and warships and things of that nature. So it's interesting that, it's this Gouverneur Morris was looking at these ships on the Erie Canal and musing to himself, we at a certain point soon we'll be able to get those ships out of the Erie Canal and down the Hudson River. So this was critical in terms of, we had to develop the United States. We had to build the agro-industrial and infrastructure of the United States to really be free from the British Empire. So at the end of the war, something critical occurred, because the first national bank charter had ended in 1811, and President Madison had basically let the charter expire and did not recreate that charter, did not recreate that national bank. After the War of 1812, in one of his last acts as president was to create the second national bank of the United States. And that national bank lasted until 1837. So just keep that in mind, and I want to make a point about that later. So what occurred with the development of the Erie Canal is what is called the Erie School of Engineering. Now, none of these gentlemen that you see here, Benjamin Wright, Canvas White, James Geddes, Nathan S. Roberts, none of these gentlemen were engineers. Some of them were surveyors, judges. They were not trained in engineering, but they became the engineers that built this canal. Canvas White, for example, was critical he went over to England. He found the cement that could be used underwater, hydraulic cement that was used in the canal. Nathan S. Roberts, you will see later the tremendous work of engineering skill that he did in Lockport. I'll show in a few slides, you'll see what he did there. But I just want to make that point that they were not engineers, but they were committed to making this miracle happen, of a 363-mile canal across the wilderness. Nothing short of madness, as Jefferson said, but they did it. this gentleman here, John Bloomfield Jervis, started working on the Erie Canal as a young man, a very young man. He started basically with a shovel. And over the course of the building of this canal over a number of years, he became more and more skilled in surveying and then engineering. And I just wrote an article that's in the latest of Diane's paper, The New Federalist, which I encourage people to read. I was very excited about learning this, but this John Bloomfield Jervis was the chief engineer later of the Delaware and Hudson Canal, and then the Croton Waterworks, which was a 40-mile amazing project, 40-mile long project of bringing water from the Croton Reservoir all the way down to New York City. And you can see the great structures that he built. The aqueduct here that brought the water across. In fact, when you go down the FDR, or the Harlem River Drive, you still see the new aqueduct that's there. Well, this was you can see the old aqueduct that was built, which was a marvel in its day. And I described that in the article. And you see the reservoir that was built behind it to hold huge amounts of water. And the article's fun because it goes through his battle with the likes again of Burr, who set up the Manhattan Bank and the Manhattan Water Company, which was never committed to delivering water in New York City, but they were more committed to creating a bank, which later on became Chase Manhattan Bank. That's a whole other story. You also see here this development in the center of the water, this water S-shaped dam that he created under duress because a storm had basically knocked out the old dam. And the genius of John Jervis went to work, and he created this S-shaped dam which gently allowed the water to flow down. And so this was what came out of the Erie Canal. This was 20 years later, but just to give you a sense of it. And Nathan Roberts, he went on to build canal after canal all over the country, all the way down in the South, in Louisiana, in Tennessee, et cetera, et cetera. So this created in conjunction with the Army Corps of Engineers. Also, as Bob went through last week, very beautifully, the Army Corps of Engineers on the Hudson developed this capacity to build great projects in the United States. John Jervis worked with many, many Army Corps people to build the Croton Waterworks. Okay, back to the canal. So you see here on the right-hand side is Albany, the lowest point, and that's the Hudson River there, all the way to the right. And you can see, okay, so the middle section, right? You see the middle section, that was the one that they built first, and you can see why. It's relatively level. But then they had to go on and build these other things, which involved, many, many locks, huge numbers of locks. In fact, the first area there from Albany up to the aqueduct there, the Cohoes Falls and the aqueduct, the first aqueduct there, this was a tremendous engineering skill that was necessary to build that. So I won't go into a lot of the details, but you can see, I want to go back to that. So here's the entrance of the entrance of the canal into the, from the Hudson at Albany, or into the Hudson, depending on which way you're going. Pittsford on the Erie Canal. You can see the development of this canal, and in the background you see the town there growing. Life on the Erie Canal. Bridges across the canal were built. Aqueduct in Rochester. Here's a tremendous engineering feat. 1890, this aqueduct still exists. This picture's from 1890. And you can see, this is obviously much later. This is 70 years later. But look what's here, the city of Rochester. It didn't exist. And that's the point. None of this existed in any serious industrial capability, but by building this canal, this is what we created. The potential for whole new cities, for industrial development. Now here's the Lockport, and this is what Nathan S. Roberts designed. Remember, he's not an engineer, but he builds this. It's a series of 5 locks. This guy goes on to, to build many, many locks across the country, many, many canals across the country. On a plaque on the wall here, it says, "Let posterity be excited to perpetuate our free institutions and to make still greater efforts than their ancestors to promote public prosperity by the recollection that these works of internal improvement were achieved by the spirit and perseverance of Republican freemen." And he doesn't mean the Republican Party. Republican Party didn't exist yet. Republicans, the idea of the Republic. So this is a beautiful thing engraved on the wall there as you go up the locks. Now, at the completion of the canal, I found this song. It was written. We've written about this in past articles in the EIR magazine, which is the news journal of the LaRouche movement. It's Monument of Progress. And this gentleman here, Samuel Woodsworth, on the occasion of the meeting of the waters, and I'll show you what the meeting of the waters was, he says, "Yet it is not that wealth now enriches the scene where treasures of art and of nature convene. It is not that this union our coffers may fill. Oh no, it is something more exquisite still. 'Tis that genius had triumphed and science prevailed where prejudice flouted and envy assailed. It is that the vassals of Europe may see the progress of mind in a land that is free." Was Thomas Jefferson still one of those vassals of Europe, even though he had become a president of the United States? Perhaps. It's a mindset, October 26, 1825, DeWitt Clinton, the wetting of the waters. So he's dumping water from Lake Erie into the Hudson River in a great celebration. And down the river, you have a huge celebration. The way this was done was there were cannon blasts that started in Buffalo, and they went across, and as they were heard in each location across the Erie Canal, the next cannon blasted towards the east. And thus it occurred for 80 minutes. This went on all the way to Albany and down to New York. And then from New York back up to Albany and back across to Buffalo. But down in the New York harbor, there was a huge celebration. And who was there? Well, you had former presidents John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe, who had become a great proponent of internal improvements. Monroe was president during the time that the Erie Canal was built. Basically, he was president until 1824, and he became a huge proponent of internal improvements. But across the way there, you'll see up in the upper right-hand side, John Quincy Adams. And he's looking across at Lafayette. Lafayette had come over to the United States in 1824 and weighed in heavily on the question of electing John Quincy Adams. So John Quincy Adams was elected in 1824, Lafayette was there with him in the celebration in 1825 of the Erie Canal. And I want to bring in a figure here just briefly, Nicholas Biddle, who would become the head of the Second National Bank in 1819 and grabbed the reins of this bank and used the bank to direct credit into great projects of development across the nation. John Quincy Adams was president a bit later, as we know, 1824. Biddle was still the head of the bank, and the combination of these two people was absolutely dynamic. And Adams, picking up on this progress from the Erie Canal, which was a state-run project, he says the question of the power of Congress, this is from earlier, 1807, but you see his thinking, and now he's president of the United States. The question of the power of Congress to authorize the making of internal improvements is, in other words, a question whether the people of this union, in forming their social compact, avowedly for the purpose of promoting their general welfare, have performed their work in a manner so ineffably stupid as to deny themselves the means of bettering their own condition. I have too much respect for the intellect of my country to believe it. The first object of human association is the improvement of the condition of the associates. Roads and canals are among the most essential means of improving the condition of the nation. And a people which should deliberately, by the organization of its authorized power, deprive itself of the faculty of multiplying its own blessings, would be as wise as a creator who should undertake to constitute a human being without a heart. And thank God this man became president of the United States, albeit only for 4 years. But in those 4 years, he thrust into motion the progress that would occur from 1825 to 1860, and you see the development of the canals in this map here. And I just want to make the point that, you know, he was president from 1825 to 1829, at which point Andrew Jackson came in, and Andrew Jackson destroyed the Second National Bank, and then he was replaced by that creep Martin Van Buren, who destroyed the General Survey Act. And the General Survey Act, which was created under Monroe, President Monroe, but then massively expanded and employed under Adams, John Quincy Adams, deployed the Army Corps of Engineers to take this model that had been done in the Erie Canal and spread it throughout the nation. And Martin Van Buren overturned the General Survey Act. So it's amazing the treason that occurred after this period between Jackson and Van Buren. But I just want to make the point, I'm going to take this down now. I just want to make the point that I want you to consider for the first 50 years of the country, basically, we had a national bank. It was understood that we needed a national bank. It was natural that we had a national bank. There were people who fought against it, but the people that created the nation created that national bank and fought for internal improvements for the first 50 years of this nation. And then it was taken down. And we've, in a sense, we've never recovered from that. We've had revivals of that under Lincoln, who created the greenbacks, and who not only, you know, even though he didn't live to see it, defeated the Confederacy and then created the railroad across this nation, the Transcontinental Railroad. You know, and then Franklin Roosevelt later, who with the Reconstruction Finance Corporation effectively created a national bank out of that, even though he was battling the Federal Reserve, who wanted nothing to do with this kind of development, but he created the means to do that, or used the means to do that. So I would end there by saying, that's the fight that we're in right now. That's the fight that we've got to engage in, and that's the fight I think Diane's campaign is so critical in reigniting in this country. So thank you for listening.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This is a very appropriate discussion for the 4th of July, and I think we're going to end up going over a little bit. So those of you who are going to be on the Zoom meeting to discuss the 4th of July mobilization following this, I hope you're watching now. I wanted to bring in Bob Wesser to see what comments he has and respond to what you just went through.
Yeah, can I be heard okay?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to underscore this point that Chris made about the 4th of July, because this was absolutely clear that this was the idea of the American Revolution. It was the right for a conception of mankind and for the development, the physical economic development that fostered the ability of people to live a better life. That was the whole issue. And this proclamation of 1762, look, the Patriots, especially George Washington, deliberately provoked that war with France to get them the hell out of the continent so that we could develop the entire interior for this idea. So that proclamation, after the 7 Years' War, French and Indian War, when the Crown came in and said, it's illegal for anybody to go over the Appalachian Mountains and develop. It's illegal. You'll get arrested. You'll be tried. So that was the beginning of the American Revolution. At that point, the real patriots said, that's it. It's over. And it was just a question of escalation upon escalation. You have to ask yourself, why is it called the Continental Army? You saw the map that Chris showed, that this little sliver of colonies. It's the Continental Army. We're going to develop the whole continent. And from that point on, especially at the Erie Canal, and there's examples of this which I won't go through, but that was the way the Patriots celebrated the July 4th. Okay, we just built a new railroad from point A to point B for the further development of our independence and our freedom. And it was the same thing. And this extended beyond the country into Asia. Real patriots understood, and this was actually already going on at this time, believe it or not, which is a whole other story, which you can do a program on. And it's all the great presidents. This is the way they operated. Lincoln, FDR, in his own way, actually JFK, which was aborted. But that's the way. That's what being a patriot means. It doesn't mean winning wars or stomping on people or whatever we do these days. So I just want to underscore that, and people should really think about that, because that's what this campaign is all about. We're going to restore the actual spirit and concrete initiatives of the American War of Independence and the American patriotic tradition. So,
great, thank you. That is the right idea. People really appreciated the presentation. We have someone watching on Facebook from Lockport who says that his father's basement is built from the canal rock. So that's great. Chris, you're muted, and I think you can be unmuted if you want. So I just want to say one thing about the mobilization, and then we should go on to the discussion, which raises all kinds of things, including I will assert the importance of having a strong government, which some people may object to. We don't need a government bloated with bureaucratic nonsense, but you do have to have a government that's stronger than Wall Street and that exerts its authority, or stronger than big tech. Why are all these monopolies being allowed to exist? And shouldn't we be building national projects? Are rivers just located in one town or one state? You're not going to be able to address what's needed unless this is taken up as a national project, which is why we need to get rid of the Federal Reserve and have a national bank. Now, I just want to say something. I'm going to share screen here because I wrote a statement right here. This is on the website, sareforsenate.com. for the 4th of July, which concludes with the reiteration of the Schiller Institute call for a new Bretton Woods. And if you go to the website, you will see this. We're on the ballot now, flood the state with reality, distribute 100,000 leaflets. I would urge everybody who is watching to please go to the website, get the PDF. You can click on this and you will get the PDF version of this statement. It's a double-sided leaflet. Print 10, 15, 20, 500, 2,000, whatever you can. I would like to get out 100,000 copies of this over the 4th of July weekend, encouraging people to join our call for a new Bretton Woods system. And you'd say, well, why, how does a new Bretton Woods system, isn't that international? What does that have to do with the Declaration of Independence? Well, we're in a situation now with the Great Reset, Prince Charles, Klaus Schwab, that you have a group of banks that brags that they have $140 trillion or something like that to impose their genocidal depopulation schemes. The only way to break the back of that is that large nations have to come together. Now, Biden has done a great job at isolating the United States from the civilized world with his NATO, UK, US war against Russia and the threatened war against China. So these nations, China, Russia, India, Brazil, all kinds of the BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, is now going to be joined, it sounds like, by Argentina and Iran. They have, without Argentina and Iran, I think something like 4.3 billion people. The G7 has only, or 3.2 billion people. It's 3.2 billion people. The G7 has only 777 million people. So you can ask yourself who is isolated. So the way for the United States now to get back its sovereignty is to join with other nations to crush this massive bubble of indebtedness held by the City of London and Wall Street. And I really want to get this out because, as you can see in the statement, I quote from the original Declaration of Independence, the grievances against the British Empire, and I think we should remember why we had the revolution and not act like that. Anyway, I wanted to say that, but if you have more, please go ahead. We can take another 5 or 10 minutes.
I mean, I'll just reiterate. I mean, this was in the eyes of the British Empire, and that because you might want to ask yourself, well, what is it with this fierce opposition of Van Buren and Burr and London allied Wall Street banking operation? This was always the casus belli. Is this threatens their entire system, and that's these ideas that Chris was presenting. I just have to underscore these are not, well, these are nice, wonderful ideas, and let's have some nice. No, there's an enemy here, and they are going to go to war to try to stop this and do everything. And I don't know if Chris, you want to say anything more about that, but
Sure.
this is
yeah. I just look. Take the case of the of the Lake Mead. Lake Mead's drying up right now. Now Lake Mead was created by the Hoover Dam, and it was man's intervention into nature to use the water to create a reservoir there and a whole series of reservoirs. Barker Dam, Lake Havasu. This developed the potential for agriculture in California, the Imperial Valley, the Central Valley. I mean, FDR did this. So it's going to be a battle because look, if you say we should build NWAPA, we should build the North American Water Power Alliance and bring water from Alaska down to Texas. You know what's going to happen if you propose that? The environmentalist movement will go absolutely ballistic. They will say absolutely not. I mean, they're gleeful that Lake Mead is drying up because they're saying, you see, it's not going to work. Anything man does, it's not going to work. You know, Mother Nature will prevail. And so you have so this is going to be a battle. I mean, we have to build NWAPA. We've got to do this. If John F. Kennedy had lived, we would have built it. If Robert Kennedy had lived, we would have built it. And, you know, there's another great senator from New York who used, you know, his Senate seat on behalf of the development of the nation as a whole, and then they killed him before he could become president. So you know, that's what they do. They kill people who propose these things. So Bob's absolutely right. It's an absolute battle, you know, and we don't have a functioning Congress or Senate right now. We have a handful of congressmen and senators who sometimes say some sensible things, what they're opposed to. What senators and congressmen come out and say, let's build something great like this again? Not a one. Not a one. President Biden? Absolutely not. Totally opposed to it. His Build Back Better nonsense, that's not going to build anything like that. There's windmills and solar panels. You can't build a nation on windmills and solar panels. It's a complete fraud. And, you know, to Diane's point about a big government or a strong government or an effective government, that's where people, they look at that and they say, I don't know, big government, does that mean like trillions of dollars wasted on windmills and solar panels? Okay, well, if Joe Biden is calling the shots, yes, but that doesn't represent government. That represents the British Empire influence on the United States. You know, so what's government? Government is defending the general welfare of the people and having the power to build things that the nation needs for the internal improvements of the nation as a whole. And that's what General Washington and President Washington understood. You know, so you can fight with your neighbor on this, and you got to recognize why your neighbor, as opposed to, you know, why they are fearful of big government, because the government's been tyrannical, but that doesn't mean that it's the government that we intend to create.
The government's been tyrannical, and Wall Street and the City of London have been more tyrannical. And that's why people cannot afford to be, you can't sit on the sidelines. We, the people, are part of the government. Some people would call it the fourth branch of government. What was demonstrated with the petitioning to put my name on the ballot against Senator Chuck Schumer indicates that we can take back our nation. These interesting recent rulings by the Supreme Court are an interesting shift, but we have to make sure that the actual good comes out of this, the common good, the principle of the general welfare. That's what our nation was known for, and we can work with these other nations. And that's why we urgently need a new Bretton Woods to put the system through bankruptcy. So, Bob, anything else you would like to add?
Nope.
Okay.
The battle's on.
Yes, it is on. I'd wish everyone to have a wonderful 4th of July. Go to SareForSenate.com, print out a bunch of those leaflets, get them out everywhere. I will let you know that on Sunday, July 3rd at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, I will be speaking to a Schiller Institute conference over Zoom with Helga Zepp-LaRouche on this theme of the necessity of convening a new Bretton Woods. And that is our way of celebrating and elevating the conception of the 4th of July, which the world will be happy for. So Sunday at 1 o'clock, go to the schillerinstitute.com to watch that. And again, don't forget to print out those leaflets. Do it, get them out. Let's organize the state. Thank you both for joining us. And for all the activists, we'll see you shortly.